All right, everyone. The Washington Post has a problem, which is that they've painted themselves into the TDS corner. Jeff Bezos now coming out and saying he wants more conservative writers for the Washington Post. This is not evidence that Jeff Bezos has suddenly grown a conscience and said, well, censorship's getting out of hand. Maybe I should help do something about that. This is all about the money. It's a money play. He's hedging his bets on, if I can unpaint myself out of this corner, I have a little bit more breathing space, a little bit more latitude. I'll tell you why it's kind of risky, though. When you've spent years being one of the premier TDS rags, and Trump, whether he wins or loses, you've only got 4 more years before you can no longer do the TDS shuffle as your main form of journalism. You'll have to pivot to generally rambling about Nazis or something, whatever the flavor of the month is next time around during the next moral panic. The problem is, for example, my audience is largely politically motivated and comprises a broad plethora of MAGA, sort of the patriot types, libertarian / classical liberal and stuff, to the point where sometimes when I talk about, for instance, gay marriage or abortion, I run up against the majority of my own audience, and I'm aware of this fact. Doing that once in a while, because I'm going to say it how I believe it. I'm not going to silence myself because I might lose a subscriber or two. That's not the way that I do things. But let's say that you have a big publication. The Washington Post does have a reasonable circulation. They do a little bit better than like the New York Times and some of the others, so to speak. And your audience is like 99% TDS suffering liberals. For the most part, the people that go back repeatedly to the material specifically because they trust or they like the Washington Post, the majority of them, they're going to vote for Kamala, and they like Bernie and AOC and stuff like that, and they fucking hate Trump. If you therefore sprinkle your publication with a handful of writers that deviate from, again, 99% of the coverage you've been feeding people for the better part of a decade, you run the risk of alienating them. People in political echo chambers, that is, especially when there's a partisan overlap, so specifically liberal / leftist with a D after the name, specifically conservatives, MAGA, etc., with an R after the name. So they'd play the football team mentality. They don't like being challenged on their preconceived worldview. And this is not just a left-wing thing. It happens when you have a hyper-political climate, especially one with a partisan element. If you didn't have political parties, it would be a little bit less. This is why the founders warned us against even having political parties. I think there's something to be said for that mentality myself, by the way. I prefer to vote on ideology. Not voting for Trump because he's a Republican. Voting for him in spite of the fact that he's a Republican more than anything else. Of course, he strikes more of the right chords with me than the neocons, like a Bush or a Cheney or something else. Cheney's not really a Republican either at this point. Not even sure what breed of animal she is at this point. She just basically, I think she believes she's going to have a career based on hating Donald Trump. And eventually he's not going to be there anymore, either in office or even in person. What are you going to do? Are you going to make TikTok videos at his funeral when he's lying in wake, if they allow him to, by the way? Yeah, who knows? She'll go to the Trump Presidential Library and start burning books or something like that, and the liberals like to do that these days. They did back in the 30s as well, socialists. The Wapo decision is a good one. It means that over time you can stabilize, but it'll take a while. What you're going to end up facing is boycotts initially. You're going to end up with a proportion, the more rabid people that are on the left wing of politics and or Dem partisans, the first time that they see an article saying, well, maybe Trump isn't Adolf Hitler actually. Maybe he's not Mussolini. Maybe he's not, Hitler, Satan, Stalin, something like that. So it's like, well, I have my problems with Donald. It'll be an op-ed, of course, an opinion piece. I have my problems with Trump, and I'm not going to vote for him, and I have problems with his fans, and blah, blah, blah. But, and as soon as you insert that but, all of a sudden, 10-15% of those lefties will boycott. We've seen it before. Then you'll get some neocons that'll come aboard and say, well, I guess WAPO is fair and balanced now. It'll still be 90% liberal sputum, but they'll be fooled by this. So you're going to swap out part of your audience. The problem with having a balanced audience like that, when most of the WAPO, it's about politics and current events, news, in the literal sense. It's often skewed, but that's what it's about. The problem is that you'll release an article, and no matter what its political leanings are, you're going to piss part of your audience off. people in the end, if they're hyper-partisan, they like echo chambers. This is what I try to crack myself out of, because my idea is I just want to be accurate. I don't really care about I care about the political ramifications of public policy. For instance, if Kamala is elected, I expect my taxes to rise. She will probably attack gig work and try to rope-a-dope people like me into some sort of stupid-ass union and stuff like that. She's pledged to continue exactly what Biden's doing, and he has quite literally tried to do that. To snuff out independent competitors of large corporations, and she'll probably start a war, and I oppose these things. But broadly, I'm more interested in my political analysis of somebody like Harris, Trump, etc., on the basis of, am I being accurate? When I make a prediction, is that prediction going to pan out? Most often it does, because while I have my bias, I have to take a step back from it. This is why I use aggregators. RCP is completely nonpartisan. They simply aggregate polls from across the spectrum, news from across the spectrum, and then they aggregate it. And so that's, one of the secrets to predictive success is to use aggregators. Ground News is another good one. You can use like 538 and similar. They aggregate polls mainly. And sports. Silver liked baseball, I guess. And he figured that politics is more lucrative, I think. But that's why I use aggregators. The Washington Post is not going to become magically a neutral network because 2 or 3 likely milquetoast conservatives, so like Bush conservatives, end up writing for them. They'll still be TDS and all these things. What they'll do is alienate a segment of their core furthest left audience and replace them with some neocons, and then call it a day. I don't think that he'll lose money long term, Bezos, or Wapo in general, but for a time it'll be a little bit more on shaky ground, I think, and they're doing this. The suggestion is made right before the election. Maybe not the greatest time to switch gears even a little bit. You should probably just fly on the same straight path that you've been going on, and then do it after the election. I think maybe he's hedging his bets. He's like, well, Trump is probably going to win, so we would like to get some of those conservatives aboard reading our publication. I guess that's the idea. So Jeff Bezos is not based. He's still a massively wealthy corporatist who has consistently supported censorship and algorithmic distortion and things like that, but it is a star. Even if it's done solely for economic purposes, and I assure you that it is, at the very least you will have some coverage there that's not lock, stock, and barrel simping for Kamala Harris for 24/7. That's about all. Peace out.